almost 24 quarters, so that's taken quite a bit of time. So if you leave out the Great Depression, what we're in right now, what we are experiencing right now is the worst economic downturn we've ever had, ever. Let's go to the next one. Now, what does that cost us? I backed up to 2001, and the numbers that you see along the horizontal axis at the bottom, those represent time, but for some reason, the way it was formatted in Excel, it didn't come out looking exactly right to me, but the period starts at 2001 and goes to 2013 for the actual data. So you can see the red line shows the path of the economy, and you can see it's got some wiggles in it. Economic growth is never smooth or steady. You know, it faster some periods than in others. And then you see right around 2007, 2008, the break in that line. I put a trend line up there to show you that before the Great Recession started, the economy was expanding at an average rate of about 2.7% a year. Now, historically, for us in America, because of all the new people we have coming into the labor force and the fact that technology makes workers more productive, you can see that if the workers you have are able to produce, let's say, 3% more output each year, just because you're giving them better tools and you're training them better and they have more experience, then you can produce 3% more stuff without hiring anybody. You don't need any new workers. So the economy has to grow in America at about 3.5% in order to absorb all the new people that come into the labor force and compensate for increases in productivity. So before the Great Recession, we were only growing at 2.7% a year. Then you have that downturn that you can see there, and then you've got the upturn up through where we are now, 2013. And I fit another trend line to that section there to show you that even though it's a short period of time, and of course that doesn't really mean it will continue that way, but right now we're growing at about 2.2. So if we were growing at 2.7 and now we're growing at 2.2, what's happening between those two paths, so to speak, that you see? They're getting farther apart, aren't they? So I went to a Federal Reserve meeting in Dallas a couple of weeks ago, and the subject was uncertainty, but they had issued a report which they commented on, in which they talked about the recovery and how it was going so far. And they actually made a statement in that report which said, not quoting now, but something to the effect that if the economy returns to its previous growth path. So even the experts at the Dallas Federal Reserve are now thinking apparently that it's possible we won't return to that growth path, and we'll be stuck in this much lower path. Now, if you don't read statistics books for a hobby, and you might be saying, I don't see the problem here. What's the difference between 2.7 and 2.2? Here's the difference. If the economy grows at 2.7, you have two economies, and let's say they start out at the same production level. One grows at 2.7, one grows at 2.2. In 50 years, the 2.7 economy is 30% larger than the other one. So what seems like an infinitesimal or very small, not worth worrying about, it's a big deal. It's a very big deal for our children and our grandchildren. Let's go to the next one, please. Now, the second item that I told you that's very important is employment. And you know that the unemployment rate is starting to inch down now. We're still over 7%. We used to not be happy unless it was at least 3.5, at least as low as 3.5, but now we seem to be building that into people's expectations as that somehow being normal. I can tell you it's not normal. It's never been normal in our country. So instead of telling you about employment, I wanted to tell you about participation. Technically, if you went to the Department of Labor's website and you looked under civilian, so that tells you we're not counting the military, we're just counting non-military people. Civilian labor force participation rate. That is a ratio that's used to indicate how many people are playing the American game, so to speak. Well, what do you have to do to participate in the labor force? You have to do one of two things. You either have to be employed, and you know that in our country, to be officially employed, you have to, A, not have worked 1 hour for pay during the previous week when they take the survey. Number two, or 10 hours without pay for a family-owned business. You have to be actively seeking work, and you have to be available. So those are the three criteria. I did not work 1 hour for pay, I was available, and I did actively seek work. If you do all those things, then you're unemployed, okay? That's how we count unemployment. We count employment, obviously, if you're working 1 hour for pay. You're employed. We put those two groups of people together, and we call that the labor force. If you're either working or you're looking for work and actively seeking, and you are available, then we consider you to be in the labor force. Now, notice the chart. This chart begins with the recovery of the economy. Once the recovery phase begins, this is what happens to those participation rates. You'll notice that in the 75 and 82 recoveries, and even in the Great Depression, you'll notice that the participation rate is rising. That's because two things are happening. Some of the people who previously were officially unemployed found jobs and went back to work. That's good. And we had some new people come in, or some people who had dropped out when the recession was really bad, and they decide, well, now I've got a pretty good chance of finding work. I'll go back and look again. Then they become technically unemployed, and they're part of the labor force. And so the labor force participation rate rises. But look at the 2009 recovery, the one we're in right now. Do you see any picking up there? Which way is that going? It's going down. Mike mentioned entitlement programs, although I don't think he used that name. It could be that what we're seeing here is a situation in which the government has made it so lucrative not to participate that people find it in their self-interest not to participate. But in any event, this is a serious problem, and when the labor force participation rate falls, it usually pulls the unemployment rate down with it. So the unemployment rate may be going down, but it's not going down because people found jobs. It's going down because people quit looking. If you don't look, you're not officially unemployed. So this is a really bad sign for what's going on. Basically, these people have unhooked from the American train, so to speak. Here's another view, if you go to the next one. These are indexes of employment to population. What percent of the population is working? Now, it doesn't matter whether you're working 1 hour, 10 hours, 40 hours, 60 hours. We just call you employed. And you'll see I've added the Great Depression case here so you can compare that with the 75 and 82 recoveries. And you can see that it is normal during recoveries for the employment to population ratio to rise. That's a sign that things are getting better. In our case, you see it's got a little cycle to it, up and down, up and down, up and down, but you'll notice it lies below that reference line that represents what it was before we got into trouble in 2007. So the employment to population ratio has still not recovered from the Great Crash. Okay, let's go to the next one. We're about to get into the subject of debt and debt ceilings, and so I thought it would be a good idea to revisit what Adam Smith said about public servants. It is the highest impertinence and presumption in kings and ministers to pretend to watch over the economy of private people and to restrain their expense. They, meaning the kings and the ministers, are themselves always and without any exception the greatest spendthrifts in the society. Let them look well after their own expense, and they may safely trust private people with theirs. The government doesn't need to be worried, according to Adam Smith, about whether you and I are managing our affairs properly. They need to be worrying about their affairs, that we'll take care of ours. Another piece of important wisdom, I think. Let's go to the next one. Now, this seems like a silly question, but I think it's a valid question. And there's a very important economic answer. It's not a difficult answer. It's not a theoretical answer, and I think you can all identify with it. The main question is, why is the government the biggest spendthrift, in Adam Smith's words? Why does the government spend so much money? Why do they spend it so foolishly? And it may not be the spending. It may be what they do with our assets. I read in the paper the other day that the Navy had sold a decommissioned warship to be turned into scrap. Do any of you sell metal by any chance? Do you know that scrap metal prices are pretty good now? What do you think an old destroyer would be worth? I don't have any idea, but the paper said the Navy sold it for $1. So why does this happen? Okay, reason number one is because they are spending other people's money. Let me just give you a brief example of what I mean. This is a $20 bill. I want you to assume that I'm auctioning it off. Let me tell you parenthetically, I'm not. But assume that I was. What am I bid for this $20 bill? $1? Okay. Well, I have $1. Do I hear 5? Do I hear 10? Do I hear 15? How about 19? Okay. How about 25? How many people would bid 25 for this? Okay, now let's quickly change the rules in the auction.